What is up, everyone? Welcome back to the Fitness Stuff for Normal People podcast. I'm Mariana.
And I'm Tony.
And honestly, there's enough fitness podcasts out there. The world doesn't need another one, but that's not what we're trying to be. Just another fitness podcast, following trends, gatekeeping information, directing attention away from what actually matters. The whole point of our show is to give you knowledge and tools so you have confidence to apply the best possible training and nutrition into your own lives. Where today we're doing my favorite style of episode. We're going to be running through a few popular topics instead of just one massive topic in a more bite-sized fashion. The first being metabolic adaptation, what it is and how much it impacts your ability to lose weight. BPC-157, aka the Miracle Recovery Peptide, how to structure training during the different phases of your menstrual cycle, and we're going to be running through our thoughts and opinions on Ozempic, especially with its rise in popularity over the past year. We're excited to get into that, but before we do, if you want to support us, the best way you can do so is by leaving a little 5-star review wherever you're listening. You can also go ahead and follow us on Spotify to stay up to date on every new episode. We really appreciate it.
And if you want access to every single one of our 12-week training programs programmed out in Google Sheets so you can track and guarantee you're making progress, like our Ultimate Push-Pull Legs, our high-frequency full body program, which I'm currently running, or any of the countless programs we now have, you can get access to all of them for just being a premium member to the podcast, which is just $5 a month. $5. That's it. You also get bonus episodes every single Friday, other sick perks like exclusive discounts, downloads like the high protein desserts we just dropped last week, and so much more. Sign up for that is down in the show notes below. Go check it out right now. You can leave the podcast on while you check it out. And before we jump in, as always, a shout out to the sponsor of today's episode, Legion Athletics. We don't need to spend more time talking about it. The supplement industry is legitimately like the Wild West. There's hardly any regulations. And unless your supplements are third-party tested, there's really no way to tell if you're getting what's even on the label, or in some cases, extremely dangerous additives, like when they found the prescribed antidepressant Prozac in fat burners being sold at GNC. Legion Athletics third-party tests every single product. And not only that, but they have an entire medical and scientific review board of MDs, dietitians, even molecular biologists responsible for reviewing every single product they release to ensure they're evidence-based, accurate, trustworthy, and up-to-date with the latest and current literature. If you need to re-up on some of your staples like their grass-fed whey protein, high-dose omega-3 or vitamin D, or anything else, you can use code FSPOD, that's FSPOD, at checkout for 20% off your first order or double points every order after that.
I will never get over when we had Mike Matthews on the podcast. That was the first time I heard about when those supplements had Prozac inside of them. And how many years did they get away with that for?
They were repeat offenders. That was one of my favorite podcasts to do. We should almost have him back on for like a round 2.
I would love that.
I want him to pull back the curtains on the industry and the shady stuff he sees going on inside it. That was a good listen. That one we might need to bring back. That was a while ago.
That was so long ago.
Could be potential foreshadowing for round 2. Crack it.
I have a Coke Zero today. Again. No Diet Coke.
That was rookie stuff. I'm with you though. I love these episodes. We get to bounce around, hit everything hot. And you might be asking, where do we come up with these ideas? What are we talking about? Metabolic adaptation, BPC-157. Where do we get all these ideas? Mainly one from the premium AMA, see what people are mostly asking about. And then 2, just our own personal experience. But we love recommendations. Now, starting off with metabolic adaptation, that's kind of a hot word lately. Have you been hearing that a lot lately, or is that more my side that we're on?
I hear it. I see people talk about metabolism all the time, like in varying contexts with regards to weight loss. So I'm sure that this is along those lines.
Because tell me if you've experienced this before. You, or maybe even the person listening, where you start off and you're doing everything right to lose weight. You're eating in a calorie deficit. You're working out consistently. You're eating enough protein, even doing a sufficient amount of cardio, but not too much. You're the sweet spot. You're doing it just perfect. And at first, everything is going exactly how it should be. Weight's going down, pant size dropping. You can even start to see muscle definition peeking out. Everything is working like clockwork. But for some reason, it stops randomly. No real reason. The scale stops moving, progress stops moving, everything just stops, and you don't really know why. And this is usually what people call or label as metabolic adaptation or metabolic damage, a broken metabolism. This is usually what people label that as. The story is really common.
Yeah.
All in all, I think it's misunderstood. Yes, metabolic adaptation is a thing. Your metabolism does adapt as you lose weight to burn fewer calories. It does. That is a fact. But no, metabolic damage or breaking it is not a real thing. And it's never stopped someone from losing weight, right? It's never been a brick wall that you can't get through. And it doesn't need to be fixed with a special diet or supplement or technique. That's what I've been seeing more of recently,
That,
is that
yeah.
you've hit some adaptation and now you need to fix it with these techniques.
Yeah.
That's what I'm seeing more lately today.
That's,
Have you seen that pop up?
yeah, more in the context of like metabolism is damaged, or this is how to fix a broken metabolism, or the habits I did that like destroyed my metabolism versus what increased it. I see that all the time. I see it all the time. People don't
Yeah.
refer to it always in terms of metabolic adaptation, but that's what it is.
At least I feel like more lately it's been switching from just saying, "Oh, my metabolism's broken." People are
To
moving away
try and
from that
sound
into
better.
metabolic adaptation. It sounds a little bit better because we'll get this one thing straight. If your metabolism broke, you would cease to live. Okay, that's you would cease to live. You would die. But we still have to talk about why so many people tend to run into this problem. Here's how it usually goes according to most theories, where metabolic damage or adaptation, it just refers to a condition where certain physiological systems have been disrupted from dieting. And as a result, your metabolism is impaired. Or in other words, it's just a hypothetical state where you're burning a lot fewer calories than you should be based on your body weight and activity levels. Okay, that's usually what it is. You're burning fewer calories than you think you should be. And on top of this is where like the broken part comes in. Once you damage it, it stays that way for a long time. Kind of like a hamstring injury or something like that. Like it just stays nagging for a long time. So even after you get back to a normal diet, you stop doing everything crazy, supposedly the damage sticks around. And that's why you gain weight, all these things. That's how the theories go. Now, y'all know, the listeners, that we're pretty big on research, right? But this is a tough subject to study because what are you going to do? Just starve people and then be like, yeah, we'll starve you and then test different aspects of metabolism? No, there's something called ethics when it comes to research. That's a real thing. And who in their right mind, one, would even sign up for something like that? Like, yeah, we'll intentionally starve you. Would you sign up? Can't say I would.
No.
No, doesn't sound like the most
No, thank you.
time. Sadly, but luckily for us, there was a certain case that did look at human metabolism under starvation like circumstances. You might have heard of it. We've talked about it before. The Minnesota starvation experiment, one of the most extreme studies on human metabolism that was ever done. It was in a POW camp towards the end of World War II. And the study started by legitimately starving people, like for real, starving people. They took 36 normal weight volunteers. That's air quotes if you're not watching this because the details of how they quote unquote volunteered, it's kind of more of a forcible thing. It was like you're either going to do these terrible things in this war or you can volunteer for this study. Which one do you want to do? So that's volunteers. That's where they got that word from. They made them do several hours of manual labor every single day, march 22 miles per week on a diet that provided about 50% of their average calorie expenditure. For 6 freaking months, this went on. All of that for 6 months. One of the subjects actually cut his fingers off because of extreme psychological distress from the starvation. By the end of the study, some of these men had almost starved to death and they were basically skin and bone. But what about their metabolism? If it were possible to quote unquote break your metabolism, you would definitely see it here, right? This is one of those spots that you would definitely see it. But you didn't. When they tested the men's metabolic rate after the 6 months was up, they found that they had only decreased by about 20% lower than what was expected. And that within 12 weeks of eating like normal again, their metabolic rate had returned back to nearly 100%. So you can't break a metabolism. The starvation mode thing, it doesn't really exist. But metabolic adaptation does. And here's what I think it's just misunderstood. What most people don't realize is that when they reduce their calories in, or how many calories they're eating, their calories out also drops without them realizing it. It doesn't just stay the same. And over our entire history, humans did physically and psychologically evolve to endure famine and go longer periods of time without food by storing and conserving calories. So when you cut calories on purpose, like when you're going into a diet, there is a little bit and more of a psychological tripwire that does increase your hunger, decreases your motivation to move, to exercise. And this slightly reduces how many calories you're burning, or what people call your metabolic rate. But here's the crazy part is that the main reason that you burn less calories when you're dieting isn't because it wrecks your hormones, which most people, I would say, that's usually the number one reason I hear, at least, is this metabolic adaptation. It just kills your hormones. Is that what you like typically heard slapped onto it? Even though it does slightly impact them, slightly, doesn't wreck them or wreak havoc, but it does this in three main ways. One is as you reduce body weight, you also reduce the amount of energy you burn doing exercise, i.e., it costs less energy to move a lighter body. Every step you take, every movement you take is burning less energy. That makes sense. But number two, restricting your calorie intake also appears to increase your body's energy efficiency, meaning it burns fewer calories during the same activities. And third, and this is a big one that people just tend not to talk about, is that your motivation tends to tank, which can just mostly decrease spontaneous activity levels and workout intensity in subtle but significant ways. And that third part is what I think people miss. What is the biggest or most fluctuating part of our TDEE, or our metabolism, that we've talked about?
Is
Well,
it your knee?
yeah, your
Your
NEAT.
knee.
Your NEAT, or your non-exercise movement, fluctuates the most, or can vary the most, the non-exercise stuff. So like walking around when you're on the phone, hopping to the bathroom, drumming your fingers when you're reading, bopping your legs when you think, stuff like that. That's what we call NEAT, or a non-exercise activity, part of our metabolism. Not our hormones, not anything special that we don't really know of. And research shows that NEAT can vary, this is insane, by up to 2,000 calories per day among individuals. Just that one portion of your metabolism, the NEAT section. And the same research even indicates that people could burn an additional 350 calories per day just by doing simple things like taking the stairs, walking short distances instead of driving, doing chores instead of watching TV, small things like that that add up. And even more, studies show consistently that spontaneous movement almost always declines when you're dieting. That spontaneous stuff. So if this isn't consciously compensated for with adding extra movement, your overall metabolic rate, or how many calories you burn, is also going to go down. That's what blows my mind the most, is people don't take that into consideration. When you're tired, exhausted, and deficit, you're probably just sitting back, you're more relaxed, you're not jumping up, you're not fidgeting, you're not moving around. I know that as soon as I start eating less, I start moving less.
This is a big topic of discussion with eating disorders too. You'll hear a lot of people say that you destroy your metabolism, especially with like anorexia specifically, because you destroy your metabolism after not. And that's why people like rapidly gain weight. And there is a lot of truth and misunderstanding involved, because
Mhm.
when you're eating that little for such a prolonged period of time, in the case of anorexia, it's just your metabolism is adjusting. You have your body has to survive on so little energy. It's going to slow down other metabolic processes in your body, because it's
Mhm.
simply, it has to conserve energy, and it's doing that for so
Yeah.
long. Once you start to recover, your metabolism is, it's a shock to your system eating a normal amount of food again. And in most cases, people are going to be eating in more of a caloric surplus, because that's
Mhm.
like, that's the process. Your hunger is so high. You almost feel this insatiable need for food after going without it for so long.
Oh, I could imagine.
Yeah. So it's like your metabolism, you're going to see very drastic changes. A lot of people see drastic changes in weight, energy levels, hunger, like hormonal fluctuations. So your body is so heavily affected by the lack of food. It's, and going from one extreme to the next, it's not that you permanently damaged your metabolism. You just have to give it time. It's not a forever thing, but your metabolic rate is going to have to need some time to adjust again to having sufficient calories.
All of everything that your metabolism doesn't just change overnight. Like you could be eating 1,000 calories a day and then go to 3,000 calories a day, triple your food intake almost. but that doesn't mean the calories you're burning just automatically jumps
Yes.
with that number.
Yeah.
And that's where I think that's where like a lot of the weight gain comes from.
Mhm.
Is you're still burning the same amount of calories you were, or it'll vary a little bit, but over time it'll go up if you're consistently feeding yourself
Yeah.
more. You'll start moving more, your body will start hitting rhythm. But that's where I think people get upset about it. I think you're right.
Yeah.
Is they don't understand that lack of catch up, one, and then two, that it's usually a big swing
Yeah.
with food intake, not a small swing of food intake. So all of that really just to kind of give a better picture of like, yes, metabolic adaptation exists, but the vast majority of it comes down to just how much you're moving and that neat aspect of things as you go through it, not just like, oh, my body is mysteriously shutting down to an extreme level
Mhm.
and I'm only burning 600 calories a day. You know, like the people that are like, I'm only eating 800 calories a day, I'm not losing weight.
Mhm.
That's not what, that's one piece of the puzzle. That's a whole nother conversation, but
I have a
it's not to the degree I think most people think it is.
I have a question for you. Would you I don't even know if this is along I think this is along the lines of the same topic. Would you say this is like would also be why like we recommend eating having consistencies in your diet in terms of not seeing, these eating a lot one day, eating super little the next day. Like some people will be like, "Oh, I ate so much that day," or I have these 2 days where I could eat a ton and eat like then really cut my calories.
Definitely a little bit, but not the main reason. I think the main reason would still be just like the consistency aspect where like if you typically structure your week like that, you're probably not going to be super
Yeah.
consistent with what you're trying to stick to, but
I agree.
it
I was
definitely
just
would
like
play a
curious,
role in
like
that
I think that
100%.
too. I was just curious. I'm like, I wonder if that's I don't know. It's the first time I really thought about that.
Yeah, definitely. Which, speaking of metabolic adaptation, all things weight loss, Ozempic.
Ozempic.
Let's talk about it. This
Ozempic.
one stuck around. This is starting to be not just a trend.
No, it's
Things
not a trend.
sticking
And it's
around.
not going
It's sticking
anywhere.
around.
And I think more people need to hear the realities of Ozempic and get used to a society, especially people in the media. It's very common to be on Ozempic. There's been this recent resurgence. I personally, there have been people talking about how being thin is in again. And I have never thought that being thin ever went out. I don't think it's a trend. I think it is a constant that our society, being thin will always be desirable. It always will be. I
Yeah.
don't think that's ever going to go away. I think that people forget or don't really want to believe that the extent to which people go to be thin is not always healthy and it's not always good for you. And I think we're just normalizing Ozempic a little bit too much. And it's kind of frustrating me a bit because of the reality of what it does. And it definitely has its pros, it has its positives. So to go through those, I just want to quickly explain to you guys if you don't know what Ozempic is, how it works. Its active ingredient is semaglutide. So it belongs to a class of drugs called glucagon like peptide 1 receptor agonist, GLP-1. GLP-1s is going to be the abbreviated.
Easier to
Yeah,
remember.
yeah. And there's a lot of different names for it. The active ingredient is going to be semaglutide, and that's what was approved to treat obesity in 2021 under the brand name Wegovy. And there's
Hmm.
different brand names depending on where you get it, what your insurance covers. And it's how it works is Ozempic mimics GLP-1. And that is a hormone that plays a role in your appetite and digestion. So GLP-1 is going to act on both the brain and the digestive system to regulate how full you feel after a meal and just kind of in general too. It regulates insulin secretion in response to eating meals so that your blood sugar is better controlled. So that's why it's really good for type 2 diabetics. It's been used for a while by type 2 diabetics. And it affects your hunger centers in your brain, specifically your hypothalamus, and it reduces hunger, appetite, and cravings. It also slows the rate of stomach emptying, effectively prolonging fullness and satiety after your meals. So that's the action. That's what it does. The big takeaway here is Ozempic makes you not hungry. It reduces people's desire to eat to the point where a common side effect is nausea. You feel sick to your stomach just even thinking about food. That's how extreme a lot of people can experience this is the thought of food is repulsive. People respond differently to these GLP-1 agonists, but for some people, and it's what pushes a lot of people to go off of it, is food actually makes you sick to your stomach just by thinking about it. It makes people have no desire to eat. It makes you think you can eat food, start to eat it halfway through, you can't eat anymore. That is the root of why a lot of people don't lose weight, because they can't ignore hunger, they can't control their cravings.
That almost can't be understated though, like how much it's not, it doesn't make you not hungry. From what people say, makes that feeling of hunger pretty much disappear. Like you can't feel that feeling anymore almost.
Yeah.
It's not like something else that just, oh, you're full. It's like, no, you just don't experience that feeling almost anymore
Yeah.
to another level.
Yes, so that's obviously going to work. That works. Nobody would need any sort of drug if it was as simple as, oh, just don't eat it, just eat less. That's what's happening, is because they're not hungry, they're in a calorie deficit. So they are losing weight. You don't have to exercise, you don't have to do anything else because you are eating so little, like you are going to lose weight. That's going to happen. If it was as simple as people not being on Ozempic, if you were just like, hey, just eat less, which yes, it is that simple, but execution, people can't do it because they're hungry. They're used to eating a lot. They have cravings.
Yeah.
There's work and energy that goes into it, which this is where I get nervous to speak about it, because I completely understand and respect how people who are extremely overweight and have had these habits for so long of overconsumption of food and growing up with a lifestyle that was not promoting portion control, not promoting movement. It's like there's so many reasons why you become extremely overweight. And I think in those cases, Ozempic can be a great kickstart for people who need the extra little push to get that weight loss started. Doesn't allow people just taking Ozempic. It doesn't promote facing what got you there in the first place. I just feel like it takes away from the fact that losing weight is so important for your health. Now it's just like, I'm not going to do any of the health promoting things because I could just take Ozempic and it doesn't matter. Like, this is strictly aesthetic. Does that make sense?
That's I feel like the biggest problem that you could potentially run into, because I'm with you and we can get into that next of like the potential use cases. Like it's not all good or all
No,
bad,
no, no,
but
no.
where I see what you're saying is like the potential negative pieces from it
Yeah.
are that it's kind of like a lot of the healthcare system today, which again has good and bad, but it's more about treating, not preventing
Yeah.
the problem. It's like the things you've been doing for the last 10 years on a daily basis that have gotten you to this point, it doesn't address any of those things. It puts a Band-Aid on, which temporarily fixes the problem, but that usually leads to more problems in the future because you're not addressing those initial things that got you there in the first place. That's if you don't address those, because I know under a lot of doctor care and a lot of great people who do that. I'm spacing his name, Dr. Nadolski, I think his name on Instagram. He's a weight loss doctor. And he goes heavy into that, where it's not just a prescribed medication, even though that's how I would argue most people are getting it. It's just
Yes.
like a telehealth prescription or whatever, super, super easy, but where they address all of the lifestyle factors that go along with it, the strength training, the daily movement, the overall nutrient control, like all the things that would get you there anyways. It can be a super helpful crutch, but it could also be something that you rely on.
Yeah.
And that's when it becomes really
I think I've
problematic.
said this before. So it's like originally meant to be prescribed with diet and exercise intervention as well. And I totally support that. That's how it should be done. And again, that can also, I mean, people call it a for life drug. Like there's no plans to go off of it. However, a lot of people who are doing it the right way, it's like, this is not a for life. I'm going to also work on my diet and I'm going to work on
Mm,
exercise. This is going because I want it to be temporary. And it's going to help me get there. I think that is so helpful in addressing the obesity epidemic in the US, because we do have an obesity epidemic in the US and it is a huge problem. But this is so standard of our healthcare system. The pharmaceutical industry is, we can make so much money off of a drug that fixes the visible symptom, but we're not going to address any underlying root cause, because getting to the root cause and putting into play effective changes in our system in America, how it's built, how it's structured, regulations, things to address this obesity epidemic and the behaviors that get people here, that costs us a lot of money. We don't make any money in doing that. We don't make any
mm.
money in making school lunches healthy and readily available. We don't get any money into putting nutrition education into our school system. We don't give any money into giving families, low income families, money for healthy food. That doesn't make us any money. So why would we do that when we have this drug that can address on the
Yeah.
surface, you know? That's where it's like, that's just standard of drugs. In America, I look at this, I make the comparison because I have depression, right? And I, in the past, have been on antidepressants. I have been on antidepressants when I am in therapy. I have reached for my antidepressants when I don't want to do any of the work at all. And just, I get out of my bed in the morning because I have my Zoloft. That gets me out of bed. And there are different reasons, different motivators. Like with my depression, that makes that work. I have times like now where I'm not on any medication because I'm actively in therapy. So it is paramount for my mental health to be in therapy. My
Mhm.
medication can help get me there. And it can help me seem like I'm fine on the surface. The second I stop taking it, if I'm not in therapy, I'm not good. Like
Mhm.
medication is so, so useful and so, so helpful, but it is not the end all be all. It cannot be the sole relier for anyone for any condition. And I just think that nobody's talking about that with Ozempic because there's so much good that comes out of it. But nobody is talking about the reality of like people are leaning on this and also blindly going into it, and we have no long-term data on the long-term health consequences. I mean,
Yeah.
all drugs have side effects, but like when we are already seeing side effects of diabetic retinopathy, so damaged blood vessels in your eyes, gallbladder disease, kidney problems, swelling of your pancreas, increased risk of thyroid cancer, gas, indigestion, headaches, dizziness, fatigue, nausea, Ozempic face, which is the hollowed look to your face. It's changing
Yeah.
the size of your lips, cheeks, chin. You can have,
Justin Timberlake looked like he had a little Ozempic face going
yeah,
on in that
sunken eyes.
in that era.
No, it's because you see this, you get this, it's rapid weight loss. And also rapid weight
Yeah.
loss is not good for your health. And it can go back to our metabolism. One, that is a huge shock to your metabolism, to your body, to account for that, to your basal metabolic rate. People glamorize that because you get thin really fast, but that doesn't instantly mean this is good for your health. And you can start to see it in the appearance of people's faces being so sunken in. I also, what worries me too is the approval of use in children. Like I see a lot of
Where's that at? Because that's something I'm not actually familiar with. Where's that at right
this is where it really bothers me because in adults it's like you are in charge of your own life. If you do, I think everyone should make the diet and exercise lifestyle changes with the Ozempic. Yes, but you're an adult. You make your decisions. Do what you want. It is approved for weight management in adolescents ages 12 and older. That
That's tough.
that petrifies me.
That's a little scary.
Yeah, and Tony
I
and
did
I
not
have
know that.
talked about this. It's like your eating behaviors, your lifestyle behaviors start when you are a kid. You don't have the full autonomy. It's the environment you're living in. And so as kids where you don't have that much autonomy to make your own nutrition and lifestyle changes, like I mean, your food like is what your parents have money for and what they put on the table and what they have in school, right? Like how much you exercise. Like if you don't want to exercise and you don't have parents, it's like a lot of it depends on your parents. So
Mhm.
now that we get to give these kids a drug who don't have the ability in their brain to make these autonomous decisions for their health, we are just going to give them a drug. What do they do when so they just rely on this for the rest of their lives? And like this is me, I don't have an answer to this. This is just
Yeah.
this is also something so new to me and something I'm looking at that I'm like that makes me so scared because at for kids, the education on nutrition, exercise, health, like building those habits is so, 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 so important from an early age. And this allows us to not do that as much because the more we get kids on Ozempic and the lower the childhood obesity epidemic gets, the less time and energy our government, the state officials are going to put in supporting interventions that help with the childhood obesity epidemic because we're going to look at the data and less kids are overweight because we have Ozempic. And just like that's just my rambling thoughts on it. And that really concerns me.
That part is really scary. That part should be scary.
Yeah.
It's a little bit terrifying that that's again, if you're an adult, you wanna do things where you're trading off pieces of the future for now. totally great, but I'm with you. It's like there's just in your development, there's so much
Right?
important time that could be lost there that you can't get back.
And
And I'm even thinking not even just with the adolescence, but like in going through where people might hear the side effects or the potential side effects that go along with it. And just from knowing quite a few people who have taken it, most who ultimately get off fairly quick, like in the first few months of taking it too, where a lot of the side effects come from aren't the direct side effects from the medication, is what I've noticed from talking to a lot of people who have taken this.
mhm.
I don't know if you've seen more about this, but when you talk to people who are on it, I mean, one, it's not uncommon for these people's appetite to be crushed where like even 4 to 600 calories a day is tough. Like 4 to 6, maybe 800 calories a day is tough. Like
Mhm.
not easy. It's snacking on. It's like it's a hard thing to reach. And we know, like, and we talk about this when we talk about how to set up weight loss or anything else. Your body likes when you feed it fuel and energy. Your body runs off of it. It lives off of that food and fuel. Now, if you're only eating 4, 6, 800 calories a day, how many nutrients are you getting through that? Vitamins, minerals, proteins,
Yeah.
fibers, things like that that your body needs to run, right? So like it's almost like the whole picture perfect of how I think now we understand this as a society. You see a bodybuilder on stage. That used to be the picture perfect image of what health is, quote unquote health is. And now we realize, oh, bodybuilders on stage are usually some of the most unhealthy people that you'll ever see, blood test wise, psychologically wise. Every measure of health you could possibly measure, a bodybuilder on stage is usually at the lowest end of the totem pole,
Mhm.
but they look that way. I think the same thing is happening here where it's like losing weight is now the only thing that matters. And it's like the Ozempic phase. You're not giving your body nutrients, vitamins, minerals. I've seen people's energy and fatigue through the roof where they can't even keep their eyes open half the day. They can't move. And a big side effect of this is when you see this, and I know this is where people will argue for it, is you typically do see quite a bit of muscle loss while taking it. And people are like, oh, well, not if you do the right things, like eat enough protein and lift weights. But when you talk to people who are on Ozempic, they have a hard enough time getting out of bed
Mhm.
that it's like they'll say that they want to go lift weights. They're like, I physically can't. Like my body is out of energy. I'm
Yeah.
exhausted. There's no chance I can do that. Protein. We already know when you're full and satiated, how appetizing does protein look? Not at all. It looks just, it's the last thing you want to eat, right? Like a big old chicken breast. So people can't get enough protein. They can't lift weights a lot of the time. I'm not saying all the time. You're moving less because if you're fatigued and do you think you're going for these long walks? No. So all of these things that are so paramount for health and longevity and making you live longer, your daily step count, your strength, things that we can directly tie to longevity and how long you're going to live. All of those go so far down just because people are just obsessed with the number on the scale going down.
Mhm.
Like that's not nearly as important in so many cases. And that's why I've seen the vast majority of people that I know who have started taking it will initially see weight loss. They'll get excited. These side effects build and build and build. And they're like, I can't take it. I'd way rather be a little overweight. I don't even care. I feel like SHIT 24/7. This is not a life I really want to live.
Yeah.
And that's where I see the negative secondary consequences of this coming from. Outside of all the direct consequences, like you're talking about with the impact on thyroid, on different hormones, on pancreatitis, on gallbladder disease, on all those other things, the secondary ones seem like they're the hardest hitting almost
Yeah.
that people understand.
Yeah, because this is positioned as a drug for life. You go on it, you stay on it. Like it's not prescribed with when you cycle off of it. It's not what it is because it works while you're taking it and then it ceases working when you stop taking it. And that's why there is an issue with Ozempic rebound is what it's being called, or Mounjaro plateau. And I mean, you see this
Mhm.
happening a lot to people who aren't don't have access to their Ozempic anymore because there's a shortage, because people are using it, abusing it, selling it under the table. So insurance isn't covering it anymore, or there's just not enough of it to go around. And people, or for whatever reason, you have to stop taking it. Like the weight regain after you stop taking Ozempic is just the same as any sort of crash diet, but sometimes it can be
Mhm.
even worse because of that stark change, your appetite comes back, and it comes back with vengeance after Ozempic, because you are artificially putting in this incretin hormone that is acting to stop your appetite. That is its function. You take that out, that is, your ghrelin levels rapidly increase. You are so much hungrier than you were when you started. So when you stop taking it, hunger hormone, ghrelin increases, and your basal metabolic rate slows down. We're just talking about metabolism. So I feel like this is nice, ties in well. And people report the rapid onset of hunger, weight regain, even if they continue the same lifestyle modifications. This was seen in one study of individuals who stopped taking semaglutide and gained 2/3 of their weight back a year later, still continued the same lifestyle modifications. Because again, like, it's that hunger piece. It is that if you cannot control hunger, if you cannot keep hunger at bay, you are going to gain the weight, or you are not going to be able to keep the weight off. Another study of
Yeah.
individuals who stopped taking Peptide, that's one I haven't heard of before. There's so many names for it. But this is
Mhm.
in the active ingredient in Manjaro. They gained back more than half the weight they lost within a year of stopping the drug. It's like diet studies with these crash
Yeah.
diets. It's the hunger is the source of all evil here, because you can't control it, and after not experiencing it for so long, it's that rebound effect. That stark change is very, very shocking, and it's not easy to silence out at all. And that is what's also very concerning, because yes, people will go on this with the intention to take it for life, but what if you can't anymore? What if your insurance stops covering it? What if you can't afford it anymore? What if you were getting it under
Mhm.
the table, and because whoever you were getting it from isn't getting it anymore? You know what I mean? You are relying so heavily on this, and what are you going to do when you don't have it? Even if it's just temporarily. Not a lot of people are talking about it, because again, the attention is to stay on it forever, but it's just, that concerns me. And I think more people just need to be aware of that. That, like, not enough people talk
Yeah.
about this piece. You should know all sides of the coin. I was telling Tony, I'm not gonna say who, but this person that I know and am very close with. And I am from a small town. I am from a very small town, like, not near a major city, like, no, not a bunch of influencers or anything. Small town. This person's place of work, on their lunch break, in the parking lot, someone comes to the parking lot, and the staff go out and purchase Ozempic out of the back of a car, pay in cash. It is a drug deal. That's what it is. And
That story cracked me up. I thought it was like a subscriber you could buy in a magazine. No, this is like a straight up
no, no.
drug.
And then I'm talking to one of my friends who lives in LA, and I mean, LA, this wasn't that shocking to me, but this is how a lot of people are getting their hands on it that nobody is really talking about. Is, in LA, it's like, oh yeah, I get it under the table. I would never I don't need to go through a doctor. I know like 5 people who sell Ozempic. What? Okay. But nobody really talks about that, especially in major cities like LA, New York, where celebrities' influencer population is very high. It is very easy to get your hands on that drug. And if you have the money, if you have the money for it, you're going to
Yeah.
get it, regardless of if you qualify and are to meet prescription needs. That's why there is such a huge shortage. It's not because it got approved as a weight loss drug. It is because of how much is getting sold under the table, which,
And it makes sense. It's the abusing part that I think is the hard part
yeah.
that I think we'd both agree on. In a lot of different cases, if you can get it to a dose where you have really struggled with this your entire life and you've tried a lot of things, and you can get it to a dose that just almost slightly turns down the food noise in your head.
Mhm.
So it's not you're always thinking about it. You're all this, and it can help you get out from like the obese or very obese categories down to a normal weight. That's fan freaking tastic. And you're
Phenomenal.
not just continually increasing and increasing your dose to crush your hunger into nothingness, right? You can do that in healthy ways. I think that's where we're both like, this has a great purpose,
Yeah,
like a phenomenal purpose, and can solve some real hard problems for people.
absolutely.
But now that it's so easily accessible and you could go on telehealth and just lie about your weight and get a prescription, even if you aren't overweight, if you're not this, whatever, even though it might cost like six, seven, $800 for a couple pens, expensive, the abuse is where the problems are all really coming from
Yeah.
what I can see. Because I've seen even doctors, like MDs, who are weight loss MDs on social media who are it's like their whole career is basing things on not being black and white. Nothing's all good or all bad, but for some reason this is like
All,
all good
all
all of a
good.
sudden. Everyone who's overweight, everyone who can't lose weight, yes, you should use it. You should use it. I'm like, what do you know? Like, if you're just slightly overweight and it's just because maybe you're realizing, you know what, I'm lacking a little bit of discipline on the weekends, whatever. That's why I'm probably carrying these extra 10, 20 pounds. That's probably not a case where you need to rely on this medication. Or if you're at a normal weight and you're just like, again, a lot of like where the influencer status might come in. You're skinny and you're just trying to stay as skinny as
Mhm.
possible. That's not a use case where this makes sense, especially from a health standpoint. Because I'm like, it can be super helpful in a lot of pieces. Because do you know Dr. Mike Israetel? Okay, he was making, and you know Dr. Mike, a lot of Mikes.
Yeah,
Dr. Mike, one of my favorite freaking
me
people.
too.
But Dr. Mike Israetel was on the Dr. Mike podcast and brought up an interesting point, not about Ozempic, but something that kind of got me thinking on this, where he was saying how he really looks forward to a world, hopefully as soon as the next 10 to 15 years, he was even saying, where we no longer have to exercise, period. And this is Dr. Mike Israetel, bodybuilder, jacked to all crap. Like, right? I don't even know how much he weighs, but he's so much muscle, it's insane. But where we no longer have to exercise or spend any time artificially exercising so we can do cool things with our bodies, like building muscle, going skiing, playing with our kids, stuff like that. But so we could have the health benefits of exercise embedded in our very DNA or through really good pharmacology, where you take a few pills in the morning and you're good to go. And he was mentioning that in lab rats, they kind of already have, we've heard about this, the exercise pill, where you can give these rats this pill, this pharmacology, and it does almost everything that exercise does for you, short of just a very few things. That's just where it's at right now. And he's like, because it brings up a good point though. It's like, what is exercise really doing? It's really just accessing various molecular pathways, turning some of them up and then turning others down. So why not just do that with a pill instead of having to spend time going to do that? Obviously, there's going to be secondary consequences of like not doing hard things, but it also brings up a good point as well. It's like that's kind of what exercise is doing. It's forcefully turning on certain pathways in our body and turning off others. So is it necessarily a bad thing that we could achieve that? And that's a hypothetical conversation. This is not what Ozempic is.
Yeah.
Ozempic is just turning off hunger. It's not solving 99% of the problems that not exercising has. But it was an interesting thought, you know? It was an interesting thought that especially I was surprised he was
I
talking about, but
hate it.
it
I love that thought. I love that he
wow.
brought it up. I
Whoa.
that would s we could have a whole TED talk about that. I'm not even gonna start to bring up my opinions because I have thoughts about that. Oh, I love that. I would love to talk about that because it almost is just like, okay, what's next? What do we not have to do next? From a
That's where
behavioral
I'm like this.
psychology standpoint for human beings, it all sounds great,
Yeah, that's I'm
but
like from a behavior and a psychological standpoint, I'm like getting rid of that kind of hard thing. It would probably be a pretty bad thing. But it is interesting with how much healthier people could be if something like that did exist in the concept. I don't know. It was an interesting topic. That would almost be one that we could talk about. We'll do that in the
yeah. We don't
premium
need
on
to talk
AMA
about
on Friday.
Ozempic anymore because I feel like I just spent
Yeah.
too much time,
But
but
yeah, that was in all in all, because we have more short-term data on it now, which is good. But it's just, yeah, it's becoming this wildfire,
yeah.
which we're talking a lot about pharmacology. Let's transition into some peptide fun. Talking about BPC-157, which you were saying hadn't heard of at all or hadn't
I've never
hardly
heard
heard
of it
of.
before in my life.
Just shocking to me how different we're both spend a good amount of time on social media, but how I'll see like all of this get asked about all the time. And then you're like, oh, what's that? That's very nice. It's very interesting. BPC 157, though, if you've been paying any attention to the sports, the athletic world, physical world, even like the BPC 157 is very hot right now. It's a peptide. That's what it is. What is a peptide? It's just a short chain of amino acids that are linked together by peptide bonds. Ah, that's where the word comes from, right? And they can be specifically designed to mimic certain natural signals in the body that trigger hormones, for example. BPC 157, BPC stands for body protection compound, is what that stands for. But it's a synthetic peptide that mimics a natural protein found in the gut that's very involved in tissue repair and healing. And it's gained a lot of attention for its potential benefits to support and speed up the healing of various tissues in the body and injuries, including tendons, joints, nerves, intestinal tract, the stomach, the skin. It's like a healing peptide. So not something that you would necessarily be on 24/7, but if you get a bad injury, taking this purportedly speeds things up. And there's not a ton of human data on it. And that's the big trigger, but a lot of people are still using it. And where you'll hear stories from people healing from injuries like ACL or MCL tears that usually take 6 to 12 months to fully recover from, people taking BPC-157 and recovering in as little as 2 to 3 months. Or people who have injured an MCL, ACL, recovered the normal way, and then later in life injuring it again, taking BPC-157 and recovering in half the time. And this is where, and this is completely speculatory, but this is where the quarterback Aaron Rodgers, one of the best quarterbacks of all time, he was playing for the Jets. You might not have heard of him because you're not super big into sports, but first game of the season last year, got traded to a new team, supposed to be a big deal, tears his ACL, and like I think it was the first play or a couple first plays, tears his ACL out for the season. Usually that is a
Your daughter.
season-ending injury. It's a season-ending injury that you are just getting back in the swing of things for the next season when it happens. He was recovered and for himself saying he was ready to come back by the time playoffs were here in the matter of months. And people were like, how did that happen? Speculating that this is what he was doing. It was also heavily used in MMA, but also got banned, which people were really upset about. And I even experimented with it for about 4 weeks a couple of months ago after really hurting my rotator cuff. I'm like, okay, let me try this. Where I couldn't do any pressing movement with my shoulder, with my chest, any pressing movement, I really could not do any resistance or any weight for. And I tried just taking the shots, and we'll go over dosages and stuff like that later before bed. And after 4 weeks, I definitely wasn't healed 100%. But within the first 2 weeks, I could actually start doing things like overhead press, bench press, which I couldn't do for weeks, almost months leading up to that point. Right. But here's the deal with it is we're in very unusual circumstance with it. And there are now hundreds of thousands, even millions of people using this compound, reportedly using this compound, giving insanely impressive anecdotal reports and a really large amount. There's a ton of high quality animal data on it as well, but there's just a massive gap in human controlled trial and that, right? And the animal and the anecdotal reports. Huge, huge gap. And I honestly don't understand why this isn't being studied
I think I
more.
know why. Because
Why? I'm curious.
you could get reported data on based on how people are feeling, like to measure it though, to measure like the healing process, to actually measure it, like the cost of
It would be really hard to put on for sure.
yeah, yeah. But I am still like the cost of looking at that, especially when you're talking about like tissue damage. Like,
Mm,
okay, like we're gonna have to, I guess a starting point could be like imaging. So like X-rays, MRIs. Also then, looking at like you could do muscle biopsies. You could do a lot. So costly. So that makes sense there. But then I start to think, I'm like, but you could still recruit, even looking at like typically where you'll start in a new field of like research like this is recruiting like from sports teams, people who play similar sports. So
yeah, that could be.
like for ACL injuries, they're so common in the research is very common in soccer players. That's where you see them the most, and especially like
Yeah.
professional athletes, they're going to have more similar like anatomy physiology. So I'm surprised that like we aren't looking at like common injuries that sports players experience and how this affects them, even if it's just like from a self-report level. Like we're not at the
Yeah.
quality of data where we could analyze this like to measure it at the cellular level yet, but we can
Mhm.
get
At least starting to get some sort of data on it.
yeah.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's crazy because we have zero clue how much these anecdotal reports are due to placebo either or anything else. Because obviously, when I was even taking it, it's going on in my head like, oh, this is going to help me. That's just going on in my head. But it's weird because this isn't like it's speeding up injury recovery by 10% or 20%. It's like a lot of these reports are showing sped up recovery by 1 to 200%. in time. And how it works is part known, but still part mystery at this point. And we'll go over safety here because I think this is why it's so commonly used as the safety point for it. But one of the clear effects of BPC 157 in animal studies is to both encourage cellular turnover as well as cellular migration, along with vascular growth and reduction in inflammation. So, new cells and cells moving into a given area as new blood supply through the promotion of this process, angiogenesis, that we won't go too deep into, just when new blood vessels form from existing ones, right? Form around the injury. And that obviously will all help more blood, more oxygen, more nutrients delivered to the site of that injury. And this all in turn is just kind of pushing everything to the weird part here. This is what I was really confused about is that BPC 157, it's known to encourage the growth of all these things in the injury area,
But no.
but not just growth all over. And that's interesting to me. Like there's a signal to that specific injury, like your ACL, you'll see all that new growth of capillaries, of veins to that injured area, but not just throughout the body. And that's what they don't really understand how or why that happens, which is interesting.
Yeah, I wonder if it,
And
like, responds to inflammatory markers, like abnormal levels of inflammation.
it's got to be something specific to, yeah, like what's happening during the recovery process to that injury. But it's interesting because that could be a bad thing if it's just all over, but it's not.
That's
And
so
I think the
crazy.
reason, yeah, and the reason why so many people and even myself are like experimented and are experimenting with it is that the adverse effect level is incredibly high. Like it's been tested to be safe up to 2 grams per kilogram of body weight. 2 grams. And for reference, the typical therapeutic dose that's prescribed is between 300 and 500 micrograms, not per kilogram of body weight, just total. 300 to 500 micrograms a couple times per week. To put that in reference, 1 gram is equivalent to 1 million micrograms. So you're taking like less than 0.1% of what's the safe dose. That's why it's being experimented with so much is there's really not really any adverse side effects that are coming from this. Okay, not really any adverse side effects coming from this, but there is still some potential dangers, which I think is why it's still a little bit like on the edge,
Wh
right? And why people are still cycling it and not just staying on it 24/7.
Where do you get this? Can anyone get it?
Yeah, I mean, you could. I mean, peptides. It's a little shady because you can just go to like peptide research websites, and you can buy BPC-5. You can buy MK677. You could buy almost any peptide on a research website. You can also get this prescribed if you go to like a peptide therapy clinic or a hormone therapy clinic. Usually has them too, but you could even just buy them online. And the only I think caveat is I think you have to like check a box that says this is for research purposes only. That's why I'm buying this. And then they just
So
ship
these
it to you.
so
Like you're
that these
checking a
companies
box.
can't get sued essentially, like, 'cause
Yeah,
there's not
that's
enough
100%.
known
That's
about
the
them to say, like, "Hey, we don't know. We literally don't know how this could affect you."
yeah, that's the only reason why they can do it, but that's why it's being used so
Sparingly.
much. And it's just one of those things that it's interesting that it's not used or talked about more of, but I'm not telling anybody to just go out and if you're injured by BPC 157 because we just don't have a lot of human data on it. And
Yeah.
that's one of the things that's really about it. If you're really interested, I think, in learning more and more about it, some clinics offer BPC 157 as a part of like an experimental or alternative treatment protocols. It's just one of those things that's hard to even recommend anything to do. But it's interesting because I know a lot of people and a lot of sports organizations have banned it for being like a performance
'Cause it
enhancing
and if something is
drug.
banned, it works.
And that's why I know in MMA that was like a big thing with it. But the hard part is it's this has been at least shown to not improve your strength, your muscle, your
Like, it has no
recovery from muscle.
androgenic
That was the
effects, like
exactly. Exactly. So that was interesting to me. It's not giving any performance benefit. It's just helping people who get injured come back to normal faster. And that's why it was like a big debate in MMA, in a lot of professional sports organizations. It's like these guys and girls, they're putting their body on the line, getting hurt, getting injured. All this is really helping them do is get back faster. It's not giving them an edge over somebody else. It's not giving them some sort of advantage. It's just getting them back to baseline
yeah.
faster. And that's where a lot of athletes are pissed about this But I also think, and I'm not certain on this 100%, that it's hard to test for in these drug organizations. Don't quote me on that, but I think that's why like you see a lot of athletes who are recovering remarkably fast, shockingly like head turning fast, and they're just being like a big question mark, and they're just like, "Oh yeah, I just did my PT." It's like, okay, wink, wink. But yeah, that's where BPC 157's at today. Not really any human data on it. I would be shocked if in the coming years we didn't see
Well, I guess I gotta go
more of it
back. I
though.
know what I'm gonna do my research on now so I could go and get my PhD, and this is gonna be my
BPC. Exactly. No, it's an interesting one for sure, but it's one of those things, tread with caution, still a messy place to be. I think if you're really truly interested in like you got just one of those big injuries, go check out like a peptide clinic or something like that where
so
you can
your
actually
own
work with a physician to monitor, to give it to you instead of just playing with it
Interesting.
responsibly.
That's, like, so fascinating to me, though. Makes my brain spin because I'm almost like, it's about time. Like, how have we just with how science, has evolved and what we know about the human body, I'm like, how is this not a thing? Like, how do we not have some recovery drug or supplement that does enhance that process? Like, how is that how are we
Yeah, because there really was nothing for that up to this point, like nothing up to this point, except maybe, I mean, I know there's like stem cell research
stem
going
cell
on,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
but nothing, but still nothing that was this accessible. One, at least because I know in America, it's like you got to travel to a different country if you want to
Well,
get
I'm a
legitimate stem.
I'm a I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I will feed into conspiracy theories about stem cell research because I feel like so much of it is gate kept to keep us unhealthy and sick. That is a total conspiracy
Oh,
theory, but I totally believe it, especially with how much stem cell research we have and how much we know about it and how it works. That sorry.
that is wild because we do know a lot more. Like we know a lot about that where we don't know a ton about
Yeah.
this, and we know it works stupid well.
Yeah.
So it is weird how you really can't get it well
Mm.
done, at least in America. I know that you can in different countries, but
Sorry, that was just
let's segue that into that'll be a tougher segue. We went from metabolic adaptation into Ozempic. That was an easy segue. Let's go from BPC into training on your menstrual cycle,
yeah.
which I do want to preface being a guy too before you go into this. Even if you're a dude, if you're one, a coach, a male coach or a female coach, dealing with female clients, this is important
Mhm.
to at least understand. And, or just if you have a female in your life who works out, this is good information to have.
Yeah.
So, talk about this a little bit.
Mhm. Yeah. So I'm really going to talk about what's really popular in the media is this concept of cycle syncing. So it's a concept that involves adapting your eating and exercise habits to the phases of your menstrual cycle. I'm going to briefly touch on eating, but there's not much really shortly. But what I'm really going to talk about here is exercise and how women can train to accommodate how they're feeling, what their body is going through, their hormone fluctuations during different phases of their menstrual cycle. And full disclaimer though too, like this affects everyone differently. Like your cycle, it's very variable. It's not a one size fits all approach, but this can be such a useful tool for any woman to go and explore how they feel physically throughout your cycle and pick up on different patterns because your hormones do fluctuate regardless. And so you are going to feel differently at different phases. The extremes, the extent to which you do is going to vary from person to person. But this may also be especially helpful if you already suspect that your menstrual cycle is affecting your physical, your mental health. If you have been diagnosed with PCOS, endometriosis, PMDD, different hormonal disorders, this is something I would really advise you to take into account. But this is not for the general person, this is not a necessity. If you are training and you feel fine right now, you notice like during times of your period, like, yeah, you maybe like you notice those symptoms, you maybe don't have much energy, but like other than that, you
Mhm.
never think about it much and you feel like you're great. This is not like a have to. I think it's important to know about, but it doesn't mean like in the media, I think on social media, especially TikTok, people are putting this whole like cycle syncing workouts on this pedestal of like, this is, I finally got results when I started training around my cycle. And it's like,
Yeah, it's always the individual reports of like, "Oh, I noticed this, I did this, therefore
yeah,
this is how it works for everybody."
yeah.
That's what I've noticed. It's always like someone who really gets impacted by cycle syncing and they make a small change. They're like, holy crap,
Yeah.
this is incredible.
Yeah.
This is what every single person should do.
Yeah.
And I'm like,
And unfortunately, I personally think a big root cause of that is women are not educated on their cycle. I not once until I got to college, not once until I got to college, sophomore year did I learn about a different cycle phase. That is a very
hmm,
universal experience for women to not understand their own cycle because we are not taught about it. The school system, public school system, does not teach you about your cycle. They teach you about your period. They do not teach you about your cycle. It is crazy how little I remember like having a moment feeling like I didn't know my own human anatomy because I was learning so much about my body and that I'm like, this should be common knowledge. And it's not. And it's like my friends, everyone, every female I know have interacted with learned about their cycle phases very like typically in their mid to late 20s. That is shocking. So
that is shocking.
that's where I think, going back to my point here, is it is a lack of just this common knowledge we should have. And you almost have this eye opening experience of, oh, I do feel so different in these different phases, which is normal, but you've never been accounting for those physiological changes and those energy changes and the symptoms that you're experiencing. And like,
Mm,
it's not something magical. It's just I'm taking into account like when my body is performing its best and when it's not performing at its best. So that's like where this can be really
yeah.
helpful. So first, let's just like briefly go through the 4 phases of the menstrual cycle if you didn't know. So you have your first phase, which is when your cycle begins. It's around like 3 to 7. It's a 3 to 7 day period. This is when you get your period, and estrogen and progesterone levels are going to drop. Then you get into your second phase. This is 16 days until ovulation. And this is when you release follicle stimulating hormone. So you have these different fluctuations in your hormones. Third phase is ovulation phase, and this is marked by luteinizing hormone release in response to rising estrogen levels. So, ovulation often involves a slight rise in body temperature as well. This is where I have my Aura ring and I track my cycle with natural cycles and I measure my temperature every morning. And when you see those spikes, I'll have a pretty consistent temperature. It's really fascinating to look at. I'll have a consistent
I was going
temperature
to say, I've heard Aura can predict
and
cycle dates insanely
it
accurate.
is so, and you have to have a regular cycle, so that's the barrier to entry there, but and then I will see these consistent spikes, and that's when you know you're ovulating. In ovulation, this is when you can get pregnant. Also, didn't know that you had to be ovulating to get pregnant until sophomore year of college. I thought you could get pregnant no matter what. I did not know that you had to be ovulating. I'm not even embarrassed to say this. I just nobody taught me. And so I just assumed and I used to hear people saying like, "Oh, we're trying to get pregnant," or like we have to I'm ovulating. I'm
You
like,
just
"What
didn't get that. You're like, what do you mean
can't
you're
you just
trying?
do it and it nope.
Yeah.
Found that out. So this is like that's why it's like a natural form of birth control. You know you're ovulating. Okay, this is when I can get pregnant, abstain from sex or use protection, what have you. Anyway, I think that's crazy that I didn't know
Yeah.
that. And then the last phase is your luteal phase, and this is the final stage, and it's spanning 11 to 17 days. And you see a rise in progesterone. And this phase is really key for like menstrual cycle based training because you're going to experience all of your PMS symptoms. This is like, I say your luteal phase where you just feel absolutely terrible bloating, headaches, weight changes, food cravings, sleep disturbances, feeling fatigued, all the fun PMS stuff. So that's broken down to 4 different phases. And how can you account for your cycle in your training plan, your training program? First thing, if you're not tracking your cycle, I think everyone should track their cycle because then you're going to understand like your hormonal fluctuations and you can see patterns of, oh, during this time, I am typically more tired, more fatigued. During this time, I'm more energized. And you could just keep track of that. So whether I recommend Natural Cycles, that's a great tracker. If you don't have Natural Cycle, there's a bunch of different apps. So that's a great option. And
I'll go download those now.
yeah, and then getting into your each phase, like how should you train during each phase? Now, this isn't saying, like, I think people take this out of proportion and, like, I have to have a different style of training with each phase. No, if you are, especially if you're following one of our training programs, for example, this isn't me saying stop your training program and only do yoga because you're on your period. No, 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 but that's how it can be seen in the media. If you're following a consistent training program, this can help you account for the intensity at which you're training at, how you prioritize recovery, and maybe incorporating a little bit of low impact movements. So, for example, during your menstrual cycle, so the week of your period, it's very common to feel more lethargic and fatigued. It may help to focus on incorporating more low impact movements. Maybe you typically strength train 5 to 6 days per week. Okay, I'm going to strength train 3 days this week. I'm still going to have the same program, make some adjustments. It depends on the person, right? Strength train 3 or 4 days this week and incorporate 1 to 2 days of low intensity movement. Be like yoga or just walking, or simply, you don't have to change how many days you're strength training. It could just be reducing that intensity. For our training programs that we give to people in premium, for example, we will recommend to work at an RPE of 8. So that's just kind of like almost how hard you are working. It can rate how hard you are working. Maybe instead of an RPE of 8, you work at an RPE of 6. Okay, so that's going to lighten down the weight. You're going to feel much better if you're accounting for how fatigued and lethargic you usually are. You're not going to be able to put as much energy into your lift that week. And that's fine. But it doesn't mean that you have to drastically change your workout, your training program at all. And I think that that's where this gets very misunderstood. That's the menstrual phase.
I was gonna say, because a big keyword I want to highlight that you're saying too is like you can do these things. You don't need to do these things because that's where I'm like just with because I have a lot of female clients that will bring it up to me and say like, hey, do we need to be doing something like that? And I think that the like at baseline you have to remember like each person should adjust their training to their individual lifestyle and circumstances. I'm not saying males and females. I'm saying each individual person. Just like if I have a day of pure chaos at work on Mondays where I start early, I finish late, I probably shouldn't be putting like the biggest training day of the week on a Monday for me.
Yeah.
Same thing here with a lot of females. We're like, that's what we'll dive into next and start being like, okay, well, let's notice how we feel during each of these phases, each of these cycles. And for a lot of people, they're like, I was a little tired, but honestly, like I didn't notice that much of a difference. It's like, okay, you don't need to change anything.
Yes.
Because I think a lot of for women, you're right, like feel pressured into changing because they'll see this obsession with cycle syncing
Yeah.
on the internet and they're like, I need to change something. It's like, base this off of how you feel,
Mhm.
how you're doing, how you're recovering. It's definitely needed. But I was even going to say, like, in the vast majority of cases that I've gone through, vast majority don't need to change a single aspect about their training for the most
Yeah.
part. Some do,
Yeah.
but a lot, it's shockingly few.
Yeah.
It's interesting.
I think that also goes to show a lot about the benefits of having a proper training program, because a lot of people, like, before they
Yeah.
actually nail it down, are just, like, doing workouts all over the place. Maybe they're going to do a bunch of intensity workouts in a row that their body isn't used to. Like, you're just kind of
Yeah.
doing all these, but, like, with a proper strength training program, you are not overexerting yourself. I know with clients, sometimes they'll be like, I feel like I'm not. At first, it'll be like, oh, I feel like I'm only in the gym for like 45 minutes and I'm done. Are you sure? I feel like a lot of people have the tendency before they get into more of structured strength training to do workouts all over the place. And it's kind of this, if you are not going as hard as possible, then you didn't really work out.
Yeah. Like taking everything to failure
Yeah.
100 times a
Yeah.
workout. Yeah.
So then in the next phase, your follicular phase, this is where you'll typically start to feel a bit more energized with the rise in estrogen and progesterone after your period. And for people who are more endurance, so like you could just continue with your program as normal, but if you are like an endurance athlete, this is where I find that cycle syncing can apply a little bit more because
Mm.
of the energy output that you have to put into like endurance training. It's just different.
Oh, yeah.
So especially when you're feeling more fatigued and lethargic, like your performance is going to respond a lot more acutely to those drastic changes in energy levels. So I find that like endurance athletes might notice this a bit more, the impact of these hormonal fluctuations. But yeah, so that's when your energy is going to start to come back a little bit more. And then your ovulation phase is when you have that rise in LH. This is when typically your energy will be at its peak. So for people who notice this stark change in energy, like you're feeling, wow, like I feel really, really good during this phase. And again, you gotta like tracking your cycle can help connect these dots. But that's where you can really take advantage of this in your workout. Maybe you are going to amp up the intensity a little bit. I'm not saying change your workout completely, but that's where you're going to put put most of your energy in because you feel
Mm.
great, you feel really good. And it's important to know this because it's not like sometimes you could get down on yourself of like, "Oh, why were those like past like week and a half I was doing so good and now I cannot push the same weight?" Like this can connect the
Yes,
dots
that's a
a
big
little
one.
bit, and that can be really informative to know. It doesn't mean you have this huge setback. It's just like this is consistent.
Yeah, I think that's super
Yeah.
reassuring because a lot of people like, "Why do I feel so weak?" It's like, "Oh, this makes sense." Like, it makes sense why you're feeling a little bit weaker, a little bit more
Yeah.
behind. Not a bad thing at
Mhm.
all, but it does help connect the dots for sure.
Yeah, so during that phase, it's just like you can take advantage of that extra energy with how you're training. And then your luteal phase. This is I personally experience this phase the most. That's just my personal anecdote, not even my menstrual phase, but the luteal. This is like PMS symptoms. That's when they start to come about. If you do experience this, this is where you could really start to lose steam. It's like the 3 or 4 days leading up to your period. It might take you longer to recover just from an intense workout because you're just not feeling as great. Your energy levels are super low.
Mhm.
You're experiencing all of your PMS symptoms, which can make your workouts just in general extremely uncomfortable. Your mood is typically lower during this phase too. If you are, again, this is going to be everyone is different, but this is where you'd be most likely to see dips in your mood if that's a PMS symptom you experience. This is where, if you feel like very impacted by this phase, this is where I see people struggle the most. This is where I would say, like, if it's just those 3 to 4 days, be like, really tee it back. That's where I'd say, okay, if you experiencing these symptoms were to the point where like you're bottled over with cramps, like you can't stand up for too long, which some people do experience that. It's like it's not worth it
Yeah.
to push through a workout during those couple of days. This is not like a week. Like you typically experience the heightened symptoms for like 3 to 4 days. So that's where my advice would be like, it is not worth it if that is you to push through like your strength based training workout if you feel like you can't. Like low intensity workouts can be really good, especially like yoga, just because it's like good for your mind and body. But that's a time where I'd be like,
I was gonna say, would you even say almost just pushing it back a few days that's where I think it's helpful sometimes to not be training like 6 or 7 days a week,
yes,
where you have a few days of leniency where it's like, "Okay, I'm feeling like crap right now for the next day or 2. I'm gonna take the next day or 2 off,
yeah,
push it back." I'm like, would you even call that cycle syncing? I don't even know if I'd call that cycle syncing of just moving around the week a ton. And because I was gonna say it's probably just from my experience and
well,
working with a lot of different people on it, it's like sometimes it's like that part of the month will be very heightened this month,
yeah,
very low key next
yeah.
month, right? So it's not like every month, no matter what, you're doing this on day 1, 2,
Mhm.
and 3. It's like, oh, take how you're feeling kind of a thing. Would you even call that cycle syncing or just moving things
I don't
around a little
call
bit?
any of the I was just gonna bring this up. I don't call any of this cycle syncing.
Okay.
I hate the name cycle
Good.
syncing. This is called being in tune as a woman with your body and your natural hormonal fluctuations and how you are feeling during each phase of the month and just taking it into account, making changes accordingly, and having an answer. Like it's not just you're pulling different rocks and stones to give you an answer as to why you are feeling this way, why you aren't performing your best. No, this is another piece of data. Tony and I love it. A piece of very, very important data that you can look at and be like, okay, I'm checking off all these boxes. My diet hasn't changed. My activity level hasn't changed, even though I feel like crap. I'm still sleeping good. Oh, but like I am feeling like my mood is really, really low. My energy levels, I'm just naturally feeling fatigued. I am noticing that I don't know. I can't lift as much, but like I don't know why. I feel like everything is in a row, but I don't know why. Oh, I'm in my luteal phase. Okay, like that makes sense consistently. So it gives you just more data to help you make a change that is an informed change, and not feel like you're going crazy or feel like you're failing. It's just this is what my body's
Yeah.
going through right now, and I'm going to account for it, and that is beneficial in the long term. that is where people see benefits.
Okay. I wanted to hear you say it first. I'm like, I don't like the term
I hate it.
cycle syncing for that very reason. Like, it's like you're going to do something not because of how you feel or because of any feedback. You're just doing it because it's labeled as this time of
And
the
it
month. It's like, well, what if you don't feel these
and it
things this
it
time or
goes
that time?
back.
It's
I
different.
could scream about this, Tony. I know I could scream about this. It goes back to the fact that this is a novel experience for women in their mid to late 20s to learn how much their phases can sync up with how they're feeling. Like we are not, this is something so normal. It's happening. Has been happening, but now we have a name for it. And now we are learning about
Mm.
it. So we're putting it up on this pedestal of like, oh, now we're just paying attention to something that naturally happens to our bodies and has been happening, and we're just accounting for it. That's all that's happening. But because it is so new, like it's just up on this pedestal of being something that is so magical. It's not. It is not. We're just
Yeah.
accounting for a natural physiological process that goes on with all women. And it shouldn't be something that's crazy. It's just we do not learn about it. And that pisses me off. It makes me really mad.
It is wild. It is wild. Like, as a guy, because I've grown up around women, a lot of
Mhm.
sisters, mom, like family was like 90% women on big family parties. So not unfamiliar, but not that close to it as like you would be going through it. It is still shocking to hear. It's just not taught
Yeah.
earlier, or at least in depth earlier,
Yeah.
on how to respond and how to change and how to adapt to
Mhm.
things like that. It's wild.
Yeah.
It's wild.
So I think I'm really happy we talked about that. We get a lot of questions on premium about that. I get a lot of questions about that all the time. Um,
Same. Yeah, that is
but
wild. This might be one of my favorite
that was good.
little round robin episodes we've ever done. Topic wise, I liked all those. I loved all those.
I think
I like
we
that
were
one.
fired up about all of them too.
Yeah.
So
Those are the best
add to
ones.
it.
Those are the best ones. So everybody that's part of premium, we'll talk to y'all this Friday with this week's AMA. Everybody else, we'll catch y'all next Monday with a fresh new episode. But we hope you have a productive week. You kill it. Let's put a little smile on your face.
Oh,
Maybe
it's
taught you something.
the week after 4th of July. So maybe people are feeling tired.
Hopefully you still have all your fingers. Fingers crossed. If you can still do that. We'll talk to y'all soon.